lot of things in your life you can't control. You can't control where you were born. You can't control what your economic status was. You can't control who your teachers are. You can't control who your parents are. You can't control who you sit next to in math even a lot of times. There's so much in your life that you can't control. So that means that those can't be the things that define your life. If you let them be the things that define your life, it's not really your life. It's just a life of circumstance and luck. You could put anybody's name on it. It doesn't even have to be your name. It could be anybody's name. But once you recognize where you are and you do something better with it, or you shape it in some way, in fact, better or worse, whatever you do with it, at least it's your life. At least it's your life. You've created it. You've made it. What is it that makes a God a God and what makes a devil a devil? The very nature of what it is for God to be God is he creates. The very nature of what it is to be the devil is that he destroys. And there are people like this. There are people who create. And then there are people who destroy. And destroying doesn't just mean to rip apart. It can also mean to take something and corrupt it, to misuse it for its purposes. And every day, almost every circumstance, we have the opportunity to decide which of those things we are. So having said that, I guess the question is in your own life, what are you? Are you a thing that creates itself and creates and makes better? Or are you a person who lives in such a way that you destroy yourself and destroy people around you? If your childhood is difficult, depending on what it was, you might say, good. Because if you use it properly, that can make you stronger. Because if you've had to overcome some difficulties, that gives you every confidence in your life to know you have the capacity to overcome difficulties. I had a student who was orphaned. She never knew her father, and she was abandoned by her mom when she was little. She had a video from a supermarket where her mom walked her into the frozen food section, cold food meat section, and left her there, and then walked out and never came back. She actually had a copy of that surveillance video from when she was a little girl. That's the only video she has of her mom. So if I were to ask you, which is worse? If you have divorced parents, if you have no parents, if your parents were to die in a car accident, which is worse? It's almost a silly question. But does it matter which is worse? Which is the worst trauma in the world? The one that you endure. Why? Because it's you. You know, there are people who can have divorced parents, and it won't affect them nearly as much because when later on they have no parents. In other words, maybe their parents are divorced, but then they both die. And that's like, man, I'll give anything to have those divorced parents back. You never know how bad something's going to be until you endure it. And that's why I asked that question about what is a difficult childhood, because what's difficult, anybody having an easy childhood? Anybody remember having a really simple, easy one? Yeah, maybe. That'd be good if you did. That'd be really good. It's rare, but there are people like that, and it's good if you can remember that. But think about it, how it is that we remember that. Typically, we're remembering being 5 years old when we're 15, when we're 25. In other words, from a mindset that's different from when we were back then. And so you might remember something as being worse, might remember something being better, who knows? But you're probably not going to remember it accurately. But in every class I have, and I ask that question, how many of us can remember having a good childhood, an easy childhood? I'll typically have like 1-2 people who will raise their hands. For the most part, we'll raise our hands and say, it was difficult. Now, if I were to ask you, tell me what happened, and we were to make a rank order list, and we were to vote on which is the worst, who had the worst childhood, who had the second worst childhood, none of that would matter at all. If you're like number 7 on that list, it doesn't make you feel any better. I hope not, to say, well, that person had it worse, because it still was bad for you. And no matter how simple it wasn't simple. It was just compared to somebody else, if this makes sense. Like I was talking to my first period class, and we're talking about like students over in like Coronado or La Jolla, and students will say, oh my God, it's so easy for them. Their life is so easy. They go, is it really though? Yeah, because they have anything they want to have. Yeah, but do they? If you know people over there, I know some people over there, and what's life like for them? Well, they're expected to have a 4.2 or a 4.4. They're expected to have straight A's in AP classes. There's no B accepted at all. If they get B, then their parents make them go to summer school to change it to an A. There's no acceptance of anything less than that. They have to be in multiple extracurricular activities. They have to play sports. and the sports, they're expected to be the best. There's this constant pressure of always, you have to be the top, you have to be the best, you have to be perfect. And it's a constant 24/7 thing. So I guess the question is, which one would you rather have? Would you rather have that? Or would you rather have something which is like basically parents are completely absent from your life? Don't really check up on you except to yell at you once in a while. They don't really push you that way. They use sports and extracurricular activities as like a extended babysitter. They just draw, that way that you can have something to do while they're out doing other things. They don't really show up to the games or expect. Which of those two extremes would you rather have? And there'll be some people who have something in the middle, fine. But if you have to choose between those two extremes, which one is going to be more difficult? One's going to be more difficult later in life, for sure. One might be a little bit more difficult when you're growing up because you're still forming, but both sides could say that they had very difficult upbringings. I guess the question is, which of those two upbringings would you rather have? But here's the trap. If you say, I'd rather have that one where I was being pushed all the time just because it's not the one you have, then dope. Then that means that you're now making yourself accountable and responsible for creating that kind of a family for your own kids someday. So when you have kids, you will therefore expect them to have the 4.2, the 4.4s. You'll have them in constant extracurricular activities. You'll be at their games. You'll expect them to be the best. You'll push them. You'll be highly involved. Because if you yourself said that that's the better way to go, well, now you have your task established for you. Or if you say, well, no, I won't really push them super hard. I'll let them be themselves. Then again, what's the outcome of that? Is that the outcome that you want for your own kids? And if not, why would we accept it for ourselves? The point to all of this is just to say, a difficult childhood, it's almost redundant for a lot of people. Why have the word difficult in there? So it's a rare person who can say, I remember my childhood being great. Maybe like years later, but oftentimes at the time, not so much. But it's a rare person who can say that an outstanding, wonderful, childhood. So it's almost redundant to say a difficult childhood, but it isn't going to be a matter of if it's better or worse for anybody. The question is going to be, whatever your circumstances, how do you respond to them? How do you respond to it? If you're that person who says, man, I wish that my parents were more involved in my life. I wish that they would push me. Well, how do you respond to that? Do you respond to that by pushing yourself? Or do you respond to it by letting yourself sink and just sitting there saying, wow, I wish I had someone to push me? Because whether somebody pushes you or not, you're the one who has to live with the life that you choose. It's like one of the really frustrating things, whether you like your teachers or not. Do your teachers have to live with your life outcomes? One of the things I hate hearing it, I hear students will say this, teachers will say this, I get paid either way. Yeah, I hate hearing that too. And it sucks. It's true. Whether you fail or whether you do outstandingly well, makes no difference in their life outcomes. And that sucks. That does suck. But it's a truth, and that's where we are. So now the question is, how do you now deal with that? There are a lot of things in your life you can't control. You can't control where you were born. You can't control what your economic status was. You can't control who your teachers are. You can't control who your parents are. You can't control who you sit next to in math even a lot of times. There's so much in your life that you can't control. So that means that those can't be the things that define your life. If you let them be the things that define your life, it's not really your life. It's just a life of circumstance and luck. You could put anybody's name on it. It doesn't even have to be your name. It could be anybody's name. But once you recognize where you are and you do something better with it, you shape it in some way, in fact, better or worse, whatever you do with it, at least it's your life. At least it's your life. You've created it. You've made it. We've talked before about the differences between God and the devil. What is it that makes a God a God, and what makes a devil a devil? The very nature of what it is for God to be God is he creates. The very nature of what it is to be the devil is that he destroys. And there are people like this. There are people who create. And then there are people who destroy. And destroying doesn't just mean to rip apart. It can also mean to take something and corrupt it, to misuse it for its purposes. So which of those are we? Every day, almost every circumstance, we have the opportunity to decide which of those things we are. So having said that, I guess the question is in your own life, what are you? Are you a thing that creates itself and creates and makes better? Or are you a person who lives in such a way that you destroy yourself and destroy people around you? And that's a constant choice we make. And so if your childhood is difficult, depending on what it was, you might say good. Because if you use it properly, that can make you stronger. Because if you've had to overcome some difficulties, that gives you every confidence in your life to know you have the capacity to overcome difficulties. You may not want to, but difficulties are going to come. They're going to smack you over the head as you're walking down the street, like, just some idle Tuesday, not even thinking about it. And you'll get a phone call. Answer the phone, they'll say, "What is it?" "Oh, it's cancer." I was talking to a friend of mine last night. He visited my gym. We used to train together. He visited my gym last night. And he said, after we were done, he's like, "All right, I gotta run out of here." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And he just said, "Yeah, my mother-in-law, now that I'm thinking about it, it must have been his grandmother-in-law. But he said, yeah, we got a call, and yeah, she's in bad shape. She doesn't have much longer to live." I'm like, "Oh, shoot. I'm sorry, bro." And so I talked to him for a minute. He was telling me about what was going on in her life. She's 97 years old. And he's just like, "Man, she really wanted to make it to 100. I said, "Well, she's still breathing. Don't count her out, man." But what happened was, she was at home and she wasn't feeling well, so she went to the doctor and she had a UTI. You guys know what those are? So I know girls will know what that is. She had a UTI. When you're like 97 years old and you get a UTI, it's not just drink some cranberry juice and go home. It's it goes into the blood, and that led to a whole bunch, like a cascading series of problems for her. They just got that phone call one day because she was sitting there saying, "I don't feel so well." And then she goes to the doctor, and some of you might know this. If you guys ever go to the doctor because you're sick, but for some reason when the doctor tells you you're sick, all of a sudden you feel way worse. Like once you've been diagnosed, now you get it in your head like, "I have the flu," and you're like limping, even though flu has nothing to do with your legs, but you're walking back to your car limping because now it feels way worse because you've been diagnosed. That happens with health problems. All of a sudden they cascade because we find out things are bad. That was just a phone call on some idle Tuesday. Those will be the difficulties. But if you've overcome other difficulties in life, and as I told my friend, she's 97, she's overcome some stuff in her life. Don't count her out just yet. Don't count her out. I don't know how much of a say she has over this, but don't count people out unless they've already demonstrated a series of decisions in their life where they can be counted out. But that's them. They have to live with that stuff. The question is really yourself. What are you going to do with the challenges? You're going to overcome them? Are you going to fall back on them? And that's unfortunately a daily thing, man. So prepare yourself for them. Questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Happy Wednesday.